Commander Lisa Grant stood in the Galactic Council chamber and watched the holographic message play above the crystal table. Her hands were shaking, but she kept them hidden under the table where nobody could see them. The message showed something terrible. Her heart was breaking as she watched it. The human colonies on the outer rim were gone. 300,000 people had lived there. They had farms and schools and children playing in the streets. Now there was nothing but dust and fire. This was not an accident, and this was not some random attack by pirates. The Valorian Empire had done this on purpose. High Chancellor Varix sat across from Lisa, and his long face showed nothing. He did not care that so many humans had died. He spoke in his musical voice and said the colonies were in disputed territory. This was a lie. The treaties were clear, and there had been no dispute. Those colonies belonged to Earth. Lisa felt anger burning inside her chest. Humanity had followed every rule for 70 years. They had signed treaties in the blood of soldiers who fought to earn their place among the stars. They had been good neighbors and peaceful traders. And now the Valorians had killed 300,000 innocent people and acted like it meant nothing. The other aliens in the council chamber were watching to see what Lisa would do. The Valorians had always looked down on humans. They thought Earth was full of primitives who barely knew how to travel between stars. The Valorian military was strong, and their technology was advanced. What could these young upstarts possibly do to them? Lisa stood up from her seat. Her boots made loud sounds on the polished floor. She looked at Varix and spoke in a calm voice that was more dangerous than shouting. She said Earth was withdrawing from the Galactic Concordat effective immediately. Every treaty and every accord and every promise of peace was now void. The chamber exploded with noise. Aliens from a dozen worlds started shouting at once. But Lisa was already walking toward the exit. Behind her, the holographic display changed to show something new. It was footage from the colony attacks. There among the Valorian strike teams was something that made even Varix pause. A woman in flowing robes that seemed to shimmer between dimensions with long silver hair falling down her back. Beside her was a creature that should not exist in this galaxy. An elf and her dragon. The recording showed the elf woman raising her hand. Magic symbols burned in the air around her fingers, and purple lightning tore through human defensive positions. The dragon was massive and terrible. It reduced entire city blocks to melted metal with flames that burned hotter than any plasma weapon. Varix called after Lisa. His voice was not so calm anymore. He said the elf was not with them by choice. The Valorians had found her ship drifting in dark space. They had merely recruited her. Lisa turned back and her eyes were cold as ice. She said that made it worse. The Valorians had aimed this woman at her people like a weapon. That was unforgivable. She left the chamber and activated her neural link to connect with the War Council back on Earth. The conversation was brief. The decision had already been made before she even asked the question. Humanity had spent 70 years playing by the galaxy's rules. They had accepted scraps and condescension while building their strength in secret. Now the mask would come off. Now the treaties that had bound their true military power would be dissolved. The galaxy would learn what humanity had been preparing for all. Along far away, in a research facility, hidden within the storms of Jupiter technicians, began activating systems that had waited decades for this moment. Admiral Kate Morrison stood before a window, watching as massive doors of the shipyard began to open. The vessels revealed bore no resemblance to what the galaxy thought was the human fleet. She gave the command to send word to all colonies. Operation Prometheus was now active, and humanity was going to war in the shadows between stars. The mysterious elf woman named Leorile stood on the bridge of her Valorian handler ship. Her dragon Stormwing was coiled beside her, looking small because of the collar around his neck. She had been a prisoner for so long and forced to fight in battles that were not her own. But something had changed today. She had felt at the moment the human commander walked out of that council chamber. A shift in the cosmic winds and a breaking of chains. The Valorians thought they controlled her, but they were wrong. Soon they would understand the difference between a weapon and a warrior who had simply been waiting for the right moment to strike. The galaxy had mocked. Earth. They had murdered children and families and expected humanity to bow down and accept it. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous. They had given humanity permission to show the universe what monsters they could become when everything was taken from them. The war was coming, and it would reshape the galaxy forever. The Valorian fleet arrived in the Kepler system with 200 warships. High Chancellor Varric stood on the bridge of his flagship feeling very confident. This would be a simple show of strength to bring the humans back to the negotiating table. Earth only had a small defense platform and a few patrol ships. This would be easy. Lyrile stood at the rear of the bridge with her dragon Stormwing beside her. The suppression collar around his neck kept him small, like a large dog. She could feel his anger and his desire to break free and burn everything. The collar used pain to keep them both obedient. It had kept them enslaved for 3 long years, but today felt different. The air seemed to hum with something she could not name. Varric gave the command without looking at her. He told them to deploy the elf and show these primitives what true power looked like. Lyrile moved to the shuttle, Bay with Stormwing padding silently beside her. Valorian guards surrounded them as they boarded the assault craft. She reached out with her magical senses to feel the shape of the battlefield ahead. Then she froze. The human defense platform was broadcasting something on all frequencies. It was not a surrender or a plea for mercy. It was a challenge spoken in perfect ancient Elvish, the ceremonial tongue of her people that had been old when this galaxy was young. The message said that the warrior bound against her will was named Sister in Chains. When the moment came, she should choose freely. Her mind was racing. How did these humans know her language? How did they know she was a slave? The shuttle launched along with dozens of others carrying Valorian troops. The human station hung in space like a gray fortress with weapons that looked almost primitive compared to Valorian technology. But as the assault force got closer, panels along the hull began to open. Railguns appeared. Hundreds of them. But these were different from standard weapons. Lyrile could sense the exotic matter lining their barrels and the quantum chambers and the gravitational effects at their tips. These were weapons designed by a species that studied war with focused intensity. The Valorian fleet commander laughed. He said kinetic weapons were quaint and old-fashioned. Then the station fired. The metal slugs that came out of those railguns did not travel at normal speeds. They traveled at 98% of light speed. Each one was wrapped in a gravitational field that made them unstoppable. Each one carried the energy of a small nuclear weapon. The first wave tore through the Valorian ships like a scythe through wheat. Shields designed to stop energy weapons could not handle that much kinetic force. Ships crumpled and hulls tore open in air, vented into space and frozen clouds. Varric screamed orders for evasive maneuvers and return fire. He told them to deploy the dragon. In the shuttle, Lyrile felt the handler activate the pain collar. This was the signal that meant she had to unleash Stormwing. Her hands moved to obey as they always did. But then the sensors detected something new. A ship was approaching from the direction of Earth. Just one ship, but unlike anything in the Valorian database. It was sleek and dark and covered in strange markings that made her magical senses. Scream warnings. The hull was inscribed with runes. Not human technology, but something far older. Elvish wardcraft. The defensive magic her people had perfected over millions of years. But these humans had somehow adapted it and merged it with their own understanding of physics. The vessel opened its weapon ports and Lyrile felt the surge of familiar energy. Mana cannons. This was impossible. Humans were not supposed to be able to channel magical energy. They had no natural connection to it. The human ship fired and bolts of concentrated magic slammed into Valorian vessels. The attacks bypassed their technological shields completely. Where the magic struck ships did not just take damage. They aged. Hulls rusted in seconds and systems broke down in entire sections. Crumbled to dust as centuries of time were compressed into moments. Varric demanded to know what sorcery this was. He backed away from the window as if the human ship could reach through and touch him. Lyrile understood now. These humans had found something. Maybe artifacts, or maybe survivors from her people. They had studied and learned and adapted. They were doing what her captors had tried to do, but with one big difference. The humans had earned it. The voice came over the shuttle communication system again. Still in perfect, ancient Elvish, it said the suppression technology around her companion operated on a specific frequency. They could disrupt it, but the choice had to be hers. Would she remain a weapon, or would she be a warrior again? Lirelei looked at Stormwing and saw the hope burning in his ancient eyes. The Valorians had captured them using technology and numbers. But dragons were creatures of magic and will. And suppression collars were just technology. Technology could be broken. She closed her eyes and reached deep within herself to the wellspring of power. She had kept hidden from her captors. They thought the collar controlled her magic. It did not. It controlled pain. And pain was something she had learned too. Endure, she whispered in her native tongue for them to broadcast the frequency. The human ship sent out a focused pulse that struck the collar around Stormwing's neck with perfect precision. The device sparked and smoked and shattered into pieces. Stormwing began to grow. The Valorian. Guards in the shuttle barely had time to scream before the dragon expanded to his true size. 50 feet of scaled fury in a space designed for something much smaller. The shuttle exploded from within and was torn apart by claws and fire. Lirelei floated free in the void, wrapped in her own protective magic. She watched as her dragon spread his wings against the starfield. The tide of battle was about to turn, but not in the direction the Valorians had expected. Stormwing's roar echoed through space, not as sound, but as a wave of magic that shook every ship and every shield and touched every living being within range. Lirelei felt their bond reconnecting fully after 3 years of suppression. The link between dragon and rider blazed to life like a star being born. She floated in the vacuum with her magic, creating breathable air around her. For the first time since her capture, she smiled. She whispered hello to her old friend and asked if they should remind everyone why their people were feared. The dragon answered with violet flame that consumed 3 Valorian fighters in a single breath. This was no ordinary fire. Dragon flame burned in multiple dimensions at once. It ate through matter and energy and consumed the very forces that held atoms together. Shields offered no protection. Armor meant nothing. Where the fire touched things, simply stopped existing. Admiral Kate Morrison watched from the bridge of the Yun's Valkyrie. This was the experimental warship that showed what Earth had been building in secret. She saw the elf and her dragon tear through the Valorian formation, and she allowed herself a thin smile. Her first officer, Amy Foster, consulted the displays. She reported that the elf was targeting command ships exclusively. She was being surprisingly strategic about it. Not just destroying, but crippling their coordination. Kate said the elf was a smart woman. She had been watching the Valorians and learning their tactics, probably waiting for an opportunity like this for years. On the Valorian flagship, panic had replaced confidence. Varix clutched the arms of his throne as his ship shook under impacts from human weapons and dragon fire. He screamed orders to deploy containment teams and activate failsafe protocols. The elf could not have broken free, but the officer who turned to face him wore an expression of pure terror. He said the failsafe was in the collar, and the collar was gone. Varix felt something cold settle in his chest. The failsafe had been his guarantee. A device that would kill both the elf and her dragon rather than let them escape. It had been the leash that kept the most powerful weapon in the Valorian arsenal under control now. That weapon had a will of its own, and she was very angry. Lirelei moved between Valorian warships with impossible grace. Stormwing responded to her thoughts as naturally as breathing. 3 years of slavery had given her deep knowledge of Valorian technology and tactics and weaknesses. She had been forced to study them and fight for them and watch as they used her against innocent targets. Now, she would use every bit of that knowledge to destroy them. She spotted a carrier trying to launch more fighters. She gestured with both hands and spoke words in the language of creation that was older than this galaxy. Runes blazed in the vacuum, and the carrier's hangar bay suddenly experienced crushing gravity. Fighters were compressed into scrap before they could even launch. Meanwhile, the UN's Valkyrie and her sister ships were systematically taking apart the Valorian fleet. Earth had spent 70 years building these vessels in secret, hiding them in the outer solar system, perfecting designs that combined human engineering with ancient technologies. The Valorian shields had never encountered anything like this. Kinetic rounds moving at incredible speeds and wrapped in magical fields that let them pass through normal defenses. Amy reported they were receiving a communication from the elf. Audio only, but she was speaking perfect English. Kate raised an eyebrow and told her to put it through. The voice that came through the speakers was beautiful, but had an edge like steel. The speaker said she was Lirelei Stormweaver, formerly of the Eternal Courts of Sylvandril. She assumed Kate was the one who freed her. Kate introduced herself as Admiral Kate Morrison of United Nations Space Command. She confirmed they had disrupted the restraints, though she suspected Lirelei could have broken them eventually. A sound that might have been a laugh came through. Lirelei said perhaps, but the timing was perfect. She proposed a temporary alliance. Kate wanted to punish the Valorians for their crimes, and Lirelei wanted to punish them for 3 years of slavery. Their goals were aligned. Kate agreed without hesitation. But after this battle, they needed to talk. How did an elf end up in this galaxy when her people had not been seen here in millions of years? Lirelei said it was a long story. One she would share over something stronger than water if humans still drank alcohol. Kate replied dryly that humans invented beer before they invented writing. She thought they could accommodate her. The battle raged for another 2 hours. The Valorian fleet that had arrived with such confidence was reduced to a handful of ships desperately trying to retreat. Varrix's flagship was dead in space with its engines, destroyed by human railguns and dragon magic. Lirelei brought Stormwing alongside the crippled vessel, hovering outside the bridge windows. She could see Varrix inside and see the fear in his eyes. Good. Let him feel what his victims had felt. She raised her hand, and magic projected her voice directly into the bridge. She told Varrix to remember this moment. Remember that he had underestimated 2 races today. The humans were not primitives, and she was never his weapon. Only his prisoner, waiting for the right moment to strike. Varrix begged. He said they could negotiate. Lirelei said he had his chance for negotiation. He chose to murder 300,000 civilians instead. Now he would return to his empire with a message. Earth had gone to war, and they had allies beyond comprehension. Every race that mocked them, and every government that looked down on humanity, should be told that the age of underestimating Earth was over. She gestured, and Stormwing's tail struck the flagship with controlled force, enough to send it spinning toward Valorian space, but not enough to destroy it. They would limp home as survivors, bearing witness to their defeat. As the remnants of the fleet fled, Lirelei guided Stormwing toward the Valkyrie. The dragon was too large to dock, but he could shrink again. Now, by choice rather than force, Kate Morrison stood in the docking bay as the elf woman stepped through the airlock. Her dragon had reduced to the size of a large wolf and walked at her side. The Admiral extended her hand in greeting. She welcomed Lirelei aboard and said this was the beginning of an interesting partnership. The elf clasped the offered hand, and her ancient eyes met Kate's with respect. She agreed and said the Valorians had made a critical mistake. They gave humanity a reason to reveal their true strength, and they gave her a reason to fight beside them. She suspected they would regret both decisions for whatever remained of their empire. Across the galaxy on 1,000 worlds and 100 space stations, news of the battle spread like wildfire. Humanity had defeated a Valorian fleet. An elf and her dragon had switched sides. The young upstart race had revealed weapons that combined technology and magic in impossible ways. The galaxy's power structure, carefully maintained for thousands of years, had just been shattered. And at the center stood a species that had been preparing for this moment since they first looked at the stars and wondered what lay beyond. 6 weeks after the Battle of Kepler, Lirelei stood in the observation deck of the shipyard, hidden deep within the storms of Jupiter. She watched as massive vessels took shape in the construction areas. Each one combined human engineering with the magical principles she had been teaching there. Scientists, Stormwing lay curled beside her. His form was currently the size of a large horse. Even reduced his presence made the human workers nervous, though they were learning to work alongside him. Dragons had that effect on people, even those who considered themselves fearless. Admiral Morrison approached from behind with 2 steaming cups in hand. She said it was coffee and warned that it was stronger than most civilians could handle. But she figured an elf who lived through galactic ages could manage it. Lirelei accepted the cup and took a sip. Her eyes widened slightly. She said this was surprisingly good. Her people had something similar on her homeworld, though they made it from a different plant, Kate said carefully. That Lirelei had promised her the story about her homeworld. The elf was silent for a long moment, with her gaze distant. She said her people left this galaxy 3 million years ago. They were fleeing a war that consumed entire sectors. They traveled to another galaxy and established new civilizations and lived in peace for ages. She was born there and trained as a warrior and mage and served her courts with honor. Kate asked, "What brought her back?" Lirelei's voice grew softer. She said it was curiosity and tragedy in equal measure. There was a group among her people who wondered what had become of the old galaxy. They volunteered to return and see if the ancient wounds had healed. Their ship was attacked by something they did not understand, something that existed between dimensions. The crew was killed, and only she and Stormwing survived. They drifted in dark space for months before the Valorians found them. Kate felt sympathy. She said the Valorians captured them when they were weak and vulnerable. Lirelei confirmed this. She said the Valorians were smart about it. They studied them and learned that dragon bonds could be exploited through pain. The collars were designed to hurt Stormwing if she did not obey, and to hurt her if he resisted. They turned the greatest strength into a weapon against them. Kate said Lirelei was free now. She could leave and find her way home back to her people. Lirelei turned to face the Admiral directly. She said she could, but she would not. Did Kate know why Kate told her to explain? Lirelei said that in 3 years of slavery, not one of the advanced races tried to help them. They saw what was happening and understood that the Valorians were using them as weapons, and they did nothing. They looked away and made excuses. But humanity, barely a century into space, saw beings in chains, and their first instinct was to break those chains. Not to use them, not to bargain with them. To free them. Kate shifted uncomfortably. She said they had strategic reasons, Lirelei interrupted. She said yes, and they also had moral ones. She had lived for over 2,000 years. She knew the difference between strategy and compassion. Humans had both. She gestured to the shipyard around them. This war was not just about revenge for colonies. Humans were angry that the established powers thought they could prey on the weak. They saw the same injustice done to her people and refused to accept it. Kate agreed. She said the power structure was built on exploitation. The older races maintained dominance by keeping everyone else dependent on them. Giving out technology in tiny amounts, they created a system where you needed their permission to thrive, Lirelei said, and humanity refused to ask permission. Kate smiled grimly. She said they spent 70 years playing the game and learning the rules. Now they were showing everyone they learned how to cheat, which was where Lirelei came in. The magical knowledge she was sharing was changing everything. Their scientists were excited. They had been trying to understand mana manipulation for decades, but she gave them a framework. Lirelei nodded. She said humans had a remarkable aptitude for it, actually. Individual humans could not channel magic the way her people could. They lacked the biological structures, but their machines could be taught to do it. They had created artificial mages. Kate confirmed the first mana reactor went online yesterday. It was producing energy that should not be possible according to normal physics. They were not just borrowing knowledge. They were building on it and finding new applications. Lirelei said she knew, and she had seen the designs, which brought her to something they needed to discuss. The Valorian Empire was regrouping. They were reaching out to allies and painting humanity as a threat to galactic stability. Humans had won one battle, but the war was about to get much worse, Kate said with more confidence than she felt to let them come. They were ready. Lirelei challenged this. She asked if they were really ready. The Valorians had client races with technologies humans had not encountered yet. Biological weapons, and dimensional warfare and psychic attacks. And there were powers in this galaxy that made the Valorians look like children playing with toys. Kate was quiet for a moment. She said Lirelei was telling them they were in over their heads. Lirelei said they needed allies. Real ones. Races that would stand with them not because of threats or bribes, but because they believed in what humanity was fighting for. Kate asked where they could find such races. The governments had made it clear they saw humans as upstarts. Lirelei smiled, and for the first time, Kate saw genuine warmth in it. She said governments, yes, but there were others. Exiles and rebels. Races that had been pushed to the margins by the very system humanity was challenging. She knew where to find them. She and Stormwing could make contact and serve as emissaries. Kate said that was a dangerous job. Lirelei replied that she had lived for 2,000 years and survived the death of her crew and spent 3 years as a slave. Danger was relative. Besides, she and Stormwing owed the Valorians a debt, and she always paid her debts. Kate studied the elf for a long moment, then nodded. She said she had a mission then. There was a species called the Kryn, reptilian and highly territorial. They had been in a cold war with the Valorians for centuries. If anyone might ally with humans, it was them. Lirelei repeated the name thoughtfully. She said they were dragon-like in some ways. Stormwing might appreciate meeting them. Very well, they would make contact. But while she was gone, she wanted Kate to promise something. Kate asked what that was. Lirelei said not to become like them. She gestured to the galaxy beyond. The old powers and established empires started with noble goals too. They were going to bring order and protect the weak and establish justice. But over time, they became the thing they fought against. Power corrupts even righteous power. Kate met the elf's ancient gaze steadily. She said she could not promise perfection. Humans made mistakes and let anger cloud judgment sometimes. But she could promise this. They would remember why they started. The 300,000 dead. The people who could not fight back. As long as she was in command, this was not about building an empire. It was about making sure no one could casually murder the weak and expect to get away with it. Lirelei smiled. She said good. That was the answer she hoped for. She finished her coffee and set the cup aside. She told Stormwing to come. They had dragons to meet and alliances to forge. She would send word when they made contact with the Kryn. Kate wished them safe travels. And she thanked Lirelei for trusting them. The elf paused at the doorway. She thanked Kate for giving her a reason to trust again. In a galaxy full of those who would use others as tools, humans chose to see her as a person. That mattered more than Kate knew. The Kryn homeworld of Drake Theron was a harsh place. A planet of volcanic mountains and crystal deserts where temperatures swung from burning heat to freezing cold within hours. The Kryn had evolved in this hostile environment. They developed scales that could withstand extreme temperatures and a culture that valued strength and honor above all else. Lirelei guided her small, human-made shuttle through the turbulent atmosphere. Stormwing flew alongside in his full dragon form. The Kryn had initially refused to grant them landing permission, but when they detected Stormwing's energy signature, magical and powerful enough to show on their sensors from orbit, their response changed dramatically. Now, Lirelei stood in the grand chamber of the Kryn High Command. She faced beings that resembled upright walking dragons themselves. 12 feet tall and covered in black scales that reflected light. Their eyes burned like molten gold. High Commander Serax, leader of the Kryn military, studied Lirelei with clear fascination. He said, an elf. They thought her kind had left this galaxy long ago and abandoned it to the younger races. Lirelei replied calmly that some of them returned. They found that the younger races had grown arrogant in their absence. The Valorian Empire in particular, Serax's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile showing rows of crystal teeth. He said the Valorians had been problems for 3 centuries, always expanding and always demanding the Kryn acknowledge their rightful authority over this sector. Lireley stated that the Valorians murdered 300,000 human civilians. Then they mocked Earth when they protested. The humans responded by withdrawing from every galactic treaty and declaring war. Sirax laughed. A sound like grinding stone, he said. The humans, the newcomers who barely had 100 worlds, they were insignificant. Why should the Kryn care about their war? Stormwing, who had been coiled silently beside Lireley, raised his massive head and spoke for the first time. Dragons could communicate mentally with most species. His voice resonated in every mind in the chamber like distant thunder. He said, because these insignificant humans did something none of the Kryn did. They freed us. The Kryn fell silent with their attention locked on the dragon. Stormwing continued. He said they were slaves of the Valorian Empire for 3 years, used as weapons, tortured, controlled through pain. Every advanced race in this galaxy saw what was happening and looked the other way. But the humans, barely a century into space travel, saw chains and broke them. Not to use them, but to free them. Sirax's expression shifted. Curiosity replaced contempt. He asked why they would do that. Lireley answered that humans remembered what it was like to be underestimated, to be dismissed as primitive, to watch stronger powers prey on the weak and call it natural order. They saw in her and Stormwing a reflection of themselves, and they chose to act. She activated a device. Showing footage of the Battle of Kepler, the Kryn watched in stunned silence as human vessels with impossible weapons tore through a Valorian fleet twice their size. They saw the combination of advanced kinetics and magical enhancement. The seamless fusion of technology and ancient arts. Lireley explained that the humans had been preparing for this war for 70 years, building in secret, learning and adapting. They combined their own innovations with knowledge from the old times. Knowledge she had shared with them. They were not asking the Kryn to save them. They were offering a chance to join a fight the Kryn had been too cautious to start themselves. Sirax leaned forward. He asked what she meant. Lireley said the Valorian Empire had been pushing into Kryn territory for centuries. The Kryn resisted through diplomacy and limited fights, but never committed to full war because they feared the cost. They saw the Valorian fleet and alliances and seemingly endless resources. But humans had proven those resources were not endless. They showed that Valorian shields could be broken and ships destroyed and arrogance punished. The Empire was vulnerable now, mobilizing for war on multiple fronts. If the Kryn wanted to secure their borders and break Valorian power in this sector, they would never have a better opportunity. Sirax asked what happened if they refused. Stormwing's mental voice was cold. He said then the humans would fight alone. And if they won, they would remember which races stood with them and which stood aside. Did the Kryn really want to teach a species this innovative and determine that they were just another group of cowards hiding behind? Neutrality. The chamber erupted in angry hisses. Sirax raised a clawed hand for silence. He said Stormwing dared to insult them in their own chamber. The dragon replied that he dared to speak the truth, something few seemed willing to do in this galaxy. The Kryn were warriors. They should act like it. Choose a side. The oppressor they had feared for centuries, or the liberators who proved the oppressor could bleed. Lireley held her breath. This was the moment. Either they would gain a powerful ally, or she would barely escape with her life. Sirax was silent for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, the Kryn commander threw back his head and laughed. A deep, booming sound that shook the walls. He said by the fires of the old volcano he liked their audacity. Very well, the Kryn would join humanity's war. Not because they trusted these humans. They barely knew them. But because Stormwing was right. The Valorians had been a plague on this sector for too long, and the Kryn had been cowards to tolerate it. He turned to his officers. He ordered them to mobilize the 3rd and 5th fleets. They were taking back the border systems the Valorians seized 20 years ago. And they were doing it now while the Valorians were distracted with their human problem. Lireley felt relief wash through her, but Sirax was not finished. He said, however, they wanted something in return. Her knowledge of the old magics, The techniques she shared with the humans, the Kryn wanted them too. Their scientists had theories about combining their natural abilities with structured magical frameworks, but they lacked foundational understanding. Lyrily agreed immediately. She said she would send one of the human mage engineers to work with their people. They had been developing hybrid systems, technology that channeled magical energy. The Kryn might find them fascinating. Sirac seemed amused. He said, a human teaching Kryn how the galaxy had changed. Very well. Tell the human admiral they had allies. But also tell them this. The Kryn fought for their own reasons, not as servants. They were partners in this war, not subordinates. Lyrily replied with a slight bow that she would not expect anything less. Admiral Morrison felt the same way. She wanted allies who chose to fight, not vassals who were forced to. As Lyrily and Stormwing departed from the planet, the dragon spoke privately into her mind. He said that went better than expected, though, he thought. It might attack when he called them cowards. Lyrily said he took a calculated risk. Sometimes warriors respected directness more than diplomacy. Stormwing replied warmly that he learned from the best. She had changed since they were freed. Before she was cautious and measured. Now she spoke with confidence of someone who remembered what they were fighting for. Lyrily smiled as the stars stretched around them. She said the humans reminded her of something she had forgotten after years of imprisonment. That strength without purpose was just violence. But strength in service of justice was something worth fighting for. Back on the UNS Valkyrie, Admiral Morrison received the report with satisfaction. The Kryn were joining the war, not as observers or limited partners, but fully committed to taking back their territory while the Valorians were distracted. Her tactical officer reported that the strategic situation just shifted dramatically. If the Kryn hit Valorian border worlds while humans assaulted core territories, they would split the enemy fleet. The Valorians would not have numbers to defend both fronts. Kate agreed but warned against overconfidence. The Valorians still had allies they had not accounted for. And there were older, more powerful forces in this galaxy that had been silent so far. They could not assume those forces would stay neutral forever. She was right to be cautious. In the shadows between stars, ancient powers were beginning to stir. An alliance of races that had ruled the galactic core for 1,000,000 years watched the conflict with growing concern. Humanity's rapid advancement, their fusion of magic and technology, their willingness to challenge established order. It reminded them of another upstart race that tried to upset the balance long ago. That race had been destroyed as an example to others. The question now was whether humanity would suffer the same fate or whether they had grown strong enough to survive what was coming. 3 months after the Battle of Kepler, the war had spread across a dozen sectors. Human vessels struck at Valorian supply lines while Kryn fleets hammered their border defenses. The Valorian Empire that started the conflict, expecting easy victory now, found itself fighting for survival. And in the midst of chaos, Lyrily Stormweaver rode her dragon into battle after battle, a symbol of everything the old powers had forgotten. That true strength came not from domination, but from bonds forged between free beings, who chose to fight together. She had been a prisoner and a weapon, but now fighting alongside humans who saw her as equal and Kryn who respected her as a warrior, she had become something far more dangerous. She had become free. And she would burn down any empire that tried to take that freedom away.